The Voice campaign continues to generate heat, and with Thomas Mayo appearing this week to have encouraged his union colleagues to misuse special rights of entry to work sites that are reserved for their role in representing their members' rights at work and investigating breaches of the law. Well, James Morrow observed in the Daily Telegraph, Mr Mayo had instructed people to use those powers to enter sites for the purposes of pushing the yes case for the referendum. Controversial Voice to Parliament advocate Thomas Mayo called for unions to use those rights of entry, and he told a group of builders that anti-referendum campaigners were, quote, those same bastards that hate workers. Pretty shocking. It's yet another way in which the referendum campaign has turned ugly, particularly over the last week. But none of us should be surprised that a proposal that rests on identity politics has ultimately sought to divide us up and pit Australians against one another. It makes the wise words of Greg Sheridan in yesterday's Australian particularly important. As he put it, the misery of the debate is an excellent forecast of what the tone of debate will be if the voice is established in the Constitution. If you place race at the centre of institutional and constitutional life, race will assume much greater salience in politics and society. If you subsidise grievance, you'll get a lot more grievance. That's the crazy spiral of identity politics. Close quote, but he couldn't have put it better. At its heart, the referendum asks us to reflect on the principles that we want to underpin what it means to be Australian, as that manifests in the framework for our federation, which is the Constitution. And while Australians don't necessarily know a lot about the nuts and bolts of their Constitution, they are sensibly cautious about changing it. As Greg Sheridan observed, back in 2018, when The Voice was first being pushed, I alone was prepared to stand for the equality of all Australians before the law and in our polity. My words then were, quote, no one considered in their submission, that is to our committee, what is the purpose of our Constitution? If the purpose of our Constitution is to mechanically allocate the powers and functions of a federal government, and that is its purpose, then all bar one of the proposals that we were asked to consider was misconceived. The Constitution isn't an emotional document. To insert emotion in a document with a legal purpose and operation is just an invitation to judicial activism, that is, judges making laws that should be made by accountable parliaments. It would be a mistake, in my view, to entrench any form of identity politics into our Constitution. The Constitution is a legal and mechanical rather than a poetic or cultural document. And there is good reason to maintain a narrow and legal purpose for our Constitution and avoid adapting it to symbolic, emotional or cultural purposes. Well, that's the end of the quote, from which I've editorialised a little, but now we're a few years on, and looking back, I stand by those principles every day of the week.